Hello. So welcome to this Facebook Live from Sports Physio Swiss, and it's a great pleasure to meet our friend and colleague Franco Impellizzeri from
Hello,
Sydney,
everyone.
Australia. Great to see you. How are you?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So I was looking back some agendas. I have some notes. So it's about 3 years you left Switzerland.
Yes.
And then a little bit less than your well-known presentation at the Bern conference. So we thought it was maybe worth to meet you again for an update and some exchanges around this topic. So many thanks in advance for your time.
No, thank you.
Not only working and surfing in Australia.
Mainly working now and surfing, but it's okay.
So please, Franco, welcome again. And
thank you.
We are looking forward.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back virtually. And yes, actually, 2.5 years ago, I started to dig in this area because, when I was working in the clinic, I wasn't really aware about all these studies addressing this area, training load and injury. And I just approached recently, let's say 3 years ago. And at the conference was the first time that I really tried to appraise critically this area. So it's a pleasure for me to be there again and give you a brief update about this topic. And so in November 2018, I tried to present some problems that I saw reading the articles and some methodological issues. So my conclusion basically was to try to improve the methodology used for developing these studies. So what happened next? So what happened in the last 2 years? I should say that there was a debate, there has been a debate about this in general about the training load and injuries area, and specifically about the acute chronic workload ratio, because it was a very popular metric. After the conference, we actually submitted the request of retraction of the famous U-shape model, mainly because you wanted to warn about the danger of popularizing models that had an impact on the field, which are not strongly validated or even valid. So we submitted this request. It was a request of a retraction or errata corrige, because we thought it was important to warn people about the problems. What happened is that basically the reviewers didn't question our doubts and our conceptual and statistical concerns, but basically they said that that model, that editorial was just an illustrative model, just an example. So it wasn't supposed to be a validated model. Of course, we don't agree, but I just remind you that that model that was considered illustrative was presented as validated in a IOC consensus. So you can imagine the impact that had that consensus in popularizing this metric. So we were thinking that publishing an errata corrige, if not a retraction, in the same journal where this method was popularized was a good idea and a good science. Of course, the editors and the journal disagree with us. I don't want to spend time on that. The letter is has been uploaded in Open Science, and there are also all the back and forth with the journal. So if someone is curious, I don't say anything more. You can just read and you can make your idea. What changed after that? Something that changed actually was the narrative. So once we show, and not only our group but other researchers start to show some weaknesses of this model and this metric, people start to change a bit the narrative. I may understand, because if you propose to a team or to a clinic to use a method, and after it comes out that it's not that strong, maybe you want to protect. So it's okay, but the idea, the narrative, the new narrative, basically presented the acute chronic workload ratio as a way to sensitize practitioners and clinicians to the importance of overload progression. So if this was a good impact, I actually don't know, because I don't know, especially in clinical setting, how is the education. I was just to remind that the overload progression is a concept that is about 70 years old, and is a basic training principle. So. But I have another background, so probably for me was normal and was not normal in clinical setting. Another justification for going on using the acute chronic workload ratio is because it's useful to track progression over time, and someone suggested just as a smoothing technique. I just remind you that since it's a ratio, the ratio is like a percentage is asymmetric. So just to give you an example, if you decrease 200 arbitrary units, so you go from 1,000 to 800, then you move back from 800 to 1,000, you drop 20%, you go up by 25%, because of course the percentage is influenced by the denominator. What would happen if you increase 10% every week, every 2 weeks, is that while the ratio would increase linearly, the absolute workload would not follow the same linear increase. So this just to warn that if you want to use the ratio as any ratio to check the progression or to define the progression, you have to be careful. Honestly, I don't like the use of percentages and ratios because of this problem, because it doesn't reflect the percentage alone. Doesn't tell you the dose. And you may also have a look to all the studies, for example, in pharmacology, and you will see that the dose is never referred in terms of percentages, but always in absolute values, and there should be a reason. The other idea of using the acute chronic workload ratio as a smoothing, I don't argue with that. If you want to use it as a smoothing, it's fine. I just remind that smoothing means that you are cleaning from the noise. What you have to ask yourself is that the variation in the training load that you see day by day or week by week, if it's really a noise, and if it's okay to cut this noise, or maybe this variation can give you some insight and some information. Sometimes people seems that they try not to remember the methodological concern, and this is a paper published a few months ago, and as you can see here, they wrote that the acute chronic workload ratio is a model is deemed to be the gold standard and has been validated by the International Olympic Committee. So if it's it should be considered a gold standard, I'm not really sure, especially now. And for sure, it's not true that has been validated by the International Olympic Committee. So we start with British Journal of Medicine declining the request of retraction because it was an illustrative model. In the EOC consensus was written that it was validated. In reality, it was just an illustrative model. And now we see that is the IOC that seems to have validated this metric. So of course, you now know that that's not true, but just to tell you that there's still some bias around. In terms of gold standard, probably it was a gold standard because other than the Olympic Committee, there also the World Rugby Federation proposed the use of acute chronic workload ratio. Some private courses and some commercial devices implemented this metric, and also here the Australian Institute of Sport recommend to use this acute workload ratio. But I'm a scientist, and this is a scientific talk. And the good thing of science is that is self-correcting. So what happened with the acute chronic workload ratio, it's normal in science. I mean, every now and then there's some hot topic and people try to provide evidence against or supporting something. So that's the way science works. And I have to acknowledge the Australian Institute of Sport that they were, I would say, among the first to recommend the use of the acute chronic workload ratio. Now they discourage the use of this metric, and they have acknowledged the limitation that has been shown in the literature. I have also to acknowledge some previous authors, West, Sean Williams. These are great researchers, even if we initially disagree about the use of this metric, but as I always said, that's nothing personal with anyone, it's just a scientific debate. And they published this paper in which they analyze the largest set of data available in rugby at that time, I think even now, and they try different kind of approaches. And the results were quite interesting because the conclusion was that there was an inconsistency between among the correlation between the acute chronic workload ratio and injury, and these relation mostly depend on the methods that you choose to calculate the acute chronic workload ratio. And they also acknowledge, as we did, that the chronic workload is not really something reflecting the athlete's preparedness. Yeah, and in addition, they also underline that the relation is not causal. So it's normal to. I made a lot of mistakes in my career, and I'm sure I will do even more. But if we learn from our mistake, this is a way to evolve and to improve. One important topic that I try to address also with some studies is about the use of the ratio, because this metric was linked to a model, the Bannister model, that didn't use actually the ratio. It was an additive model. So I always wonder why a ratio and not a difference, and why the difference didn't show anything and just the ratio shows something. So the first point that you need to remember is that with few exceptions, which basically is when the numerator and denominator, the relation is linear and go through the zero, the ratios normally do not normalize. If you want to understand more, this is a paper. This is a very good paper explaining very well why ratios are a problem and why ratios most of the time do not normalize. So I really invite you, if you want to know more, to read this paper. So ratios do not normalize, and this was already explained by the group of Lolly much before I even knew the existence of the acute chronic workload ratio. So they already tried to warn people that the ratio can be problematic. They show that this ratio doesn't normalize. But they also wrote in their paper that to be careful because the ratio, the use of this ratio can add noise, so can confound the results. But unfortunately, people didn't care about that study. And more recently, we have formalized our concern, and we have recalculated using some data from AFL. We have recalculated the relation between the chronic load and the acute chronic workload duration. We found exactly the same like Lolly. Just to remind you that there is still bias in the area, one of the reviewers wrote us that we fabricated data. I don't know why, probably was disappointed. The weird thing is that I would suspect fabrication if I wouldn't see this kind of relation, because this is expected, but anyway. So we show that the ratio does not normalize, but we also did something else, and this is the last paper we published, in which we reanalyzed the data of this paper. So we asked the authors to share the data and to give us the possibility to reanalyze again. And I am very thankful for this opportunity. Basically, these authors, they showed that in this study that there was a relation between the acute chronic workload ratio and injury, like in previous studies. And okay, their study was more about prediction and association, but we didn't use the data for that reason. What we did is just to recalculate the chronic load, but instead of using the real chronic workload, we just created randomly generated. So we simulated from the data of the team. We resampled the chronic workload. It's just to be clear, it's like if I assign to a player the chronic workload randomly sampled from another player. So something that has nothing to do with this real chronic workload. And we also divide the acute load by a fixed number. In the paper, you can see all the details. And basically what we found is that actually something obvious, because every time you divide the numerator or the explanatory variable by a number, what you do is to rescale. And rescaling is something that is a fundamental concept in statistics. But to explain you better, if we have an odds ratio of 1.001, which means that there is basically 0.01% increase in risk, and you divide this by the chronic load, let's say 1,000, these are the numbers using the session RP workload. What you do is just to take the odds ratio and you exponentiate by 1,000, and this gives you 2.72. So when you divide your odds ratio by a number, you basically are just rescaling. Rescaling is something, for example, that you do when you calculate the increase in risk for, let's say, 1 gram of body mass, and you say, okay, I don't want to use 1 gram, I want to refer to 1 kilogram, which is more relevant, so you rescale. But of course, in this case, it was not a rescale. And the authors explained that it was a normalization because this take into account what the players have done before and after. But if the theory is right, using the same data in which the authors found a relation with the acute, between the acute chronic workload ratio and the injury, we shouldn't find anything. Instead, we found exactly the same when we divide by a fixed or a random number, because it's just a rescaling. And here you can see the results. I mean, this is just a graphical presentation, but the essence of these two graphs is that the odds ratio increasing the denominator and decreasing also the coefficient of variation of the chronic workload, which means that when you average more weeks, you're decreasing the variation. And this is the let's say the predictive ability of the acute chronic workload ratio, and you can see it's really bad. So based on this study, we were confident to say that the ratio just creates an artifact. First of all, because the rescaling is not something that we invented. The rescaling is a very obvious concept for a statistician, and so the take-home message of this is, what about the chronic workload as level of preparedness? There is a theory behind this ratio. You know that the acute chronic, what I have done, is higher than what I'm prepared and so on. But in reality, it's just a statistical artifact. So the chronic workload, it doesn't reflect the level of preparedness. It's just a rescaling value. Okay, so this, of course, question all the theory behind this ratio, and also explain why sometimes there's a relation with the injury. The relation between injury depends just on the acute load, which is the number denominator. As long as you have a difference in the acute load between the injury and non-injury, you will have a very inflated risk odds ratio or whatever measure of association you're using. We have formalized all this concern. After the conference, people, I don't want to say attack me, but said, but you have, if you don't write these things, it doesn't matter, it's just a conference and so on. So at the end of the day, we spend some time to publish all our concerns. We also publish, I will explain a bit later, a paper where we suggest what to do, because okay, you cannot use the acute workload ratio, so how can I manage the training load? And in these papers, we provide more detailed information about the methodological issues. In the commentary on the JOSPT, it's more a summary of the problems, and you can find in the JAT the details of the problems that we also listed in this commentary. But we were not the only group that start to address this issue. This is the only, at the moment, randomized trial trying to see the effect of implementing the use of the acute chronic workload ratio on health problems, including illness and injuries, and they didn't find anything, basically. So you can see here the prevalence over time of the health problems, and you see there's no difference. So tested experimentally, it didn't work. The same authors published a paper in which they calculated all the possible combinations, and they calculated that when you combine all the variable that you can vary without justification, you can generate millions of combinations. This means that you have a very high degree of freedom. So if you torture enough the data, sooner or later you will find something. And remember that just changing the categories can increase up to 40% the risk of false discovery. This is a paper published by David Carey. As I said, not only our group, but also very famous and outstanding statisticians, epidemiologists, like Jan Schreier, published a very nice paper explaining all the problems of this ratio, and also the problems that can be extended to other training load indicators when you want to associate or try to estimate the causal relation with injuries. So I also suggest you to read this paper, which is fantastic in my opinion. And as I said, we also try to provide an help to practitioners about what to do. Probably you will not like our suggestion, our recommendations, but basically what we are suggesting is that once you plan the study, the training, you can implement. once you implement, you control your process, monitoring the training load, and after you can adjust the training load and the training based on training principle. What we don't agree is to use matrix to adjust the training, because what we think is that you adjust the training not through matrix or these, let's say, magic numbers, but monitoring the responses of the athlete. This is the last framework that it actually is under revision. You can find the preprint online. I hope it will be published soon. It's almost the same, that just a small change here. But basically, what I want you to underline is that once you have developed the program, so it's up to you to develop the program, you will apply the evidence, your experience, your knowledge, whatever you like. The understanding if the training load that you plan is enough or not depends on how your patient or athletes or whatever respond to this kind of training. So it's based on the training tolerance, and this can be assessed by measuring the process, and you can measure the training effects, the acute and chronic. You can measure contextual factors. You can measure internal and external load by comparing the response to the training, for example, using some subjective measures. You should try to understand whether the training is okay, or you have to cut some load, or you can even increase more because they are responding very well. So that's the way. It's qualitative, I know. It's basically an informed decision. It's a decision informed by the numbers eventually, but it's not a decision taken by the numbers. The problem is that training, injury prevention, rehabilitation, all these areas are really plenty of uncertainties, and this uncertainty make us uncomfortable, and to try to be less uncomfortable, also psychologically, sometimes we create a sort of illusion of control. And in my opinion, all this emphasis on training load and the acute chronic ratio, but not only the emphasis on the training load as a concept, but the emphasis on the numbers, trying to find the number that can tell us what to do, is just an attempt to control the uncertainty. The problem is that when we want to control the uncertainty so much, we create dogmas. And I found a very nice article by Jason T that I suggest you to read. I found the title very informative, because science or religion. This was, in these 2 years, was sometimes the feeling I had about this topic, because at one point I couldn't really understand if we were discussing about scientific issue or it was a sort of religion or a dogma, because the justifications for going on using this metric were quite dogmatic, let's say. I haven't seen anyone at the moment questioning the methodological issues that we raise, for example. So the science is a difficult area. You need to know well the methodology, and we make a lot of mistakes. So 2.5 years ago, I start to analyze in a critical way this new metric that look really a very helpful indicator in terms of injury prevention. I think we have provided now more than enough to understand the flows, and I think that now you are free to decide by your own what you want to do. So that's just my perspective and our evidence that we provided to support our idea. Okay, thank you very much. I'm ready for the questions.
Many thanks, Franco, for your excellent presentations and overview. So it's not so everything so simple as it sounds as well, no?
Yeah.
And while I am trying a little bit to switch between devices here, but maybe to start, just as start with a small question, do you think this this kind of explosion in these last years on this topic with different types of study is trying to show absolutely something? Do you think it's because of the will or the hope to find a kind of a simple solution for actually what is very complex, no? As you very well.
Yeah, I think there are two reasons mainly. I try to keep the same approach of the first time I was there at the conference. So I try to be honest. And I think there are two reasons. One is that I have the feeling that some studies are more academic exercise, let's say. So usually what you can do with the data of a team is especially when you have PhD that are embedded in the industry, and you need to run studies. The injuries and training load is something you always have, more or less, even if the quality is another big issue. So I think that at the end of the day, people had to publish something, so they start to analyze the data, and as I show, there are really a lot of researchers' degrees of freedom. So, jumping here and there, trying one analysis or the others, at the end you may find something and you can write a paper. And from a practical point of view, I think I mentioned that the injuries is a problem. Some very good friends of mine have been fired because they had too many injuries, and others were recruited because the former staff had too many injuries and was fired. So injury is for sure a sensitive topic, and so the sometimes we want to find something, and we really wish to find something. We want to find something that is can be used every day in a fast with a fast feedback. So I see this number, I know what to do today or tomorrow, and so we really wanted to find something like that. And this is a bit this is probably obscure, and basically we fool ourselves. And the problem is that the process, the injuries, is a multifactorial phenomenon. It's very difficult to understand what to do. We can do our best. We have just published some framework to give an idea on what area can act. But at the moment, that we don't have any number that can really tell us something strong. And also the prediction, because most of our papers question about the causal relations. Why we focus on causation? Because if you change something with the idea to change the likelihood of an event, this means that you are causally associating these two let's say variables, or a variable and an event. And no studies have even tried to establish causation. I think these are the main reasons. In some ways, they wanted to find something easy to use. On the other side, we have some publish or perish side effect.
Excellent. So then I will continue, because first, maybe we apologize for that. I mean, we were going for this Facebook Live, so we didn't open to Twitter, but people can re-see the presentation, of course, maybe. And those, there are not so many questions coming. Maybe you were too clear. But maybe you can expand on this aspect. So basically, what you said is that, and what I mean by working in practically, it's the key there is the response of the athlete to the training. So, and you mentioned there are different possibilities, ways to measure the effects, also take in account the context, the internal, external load, some other subjective measures. So if you would, let's say, give I don't know how easy, but to give a practical suggestion, what would you choose? Maybe depending which sport, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big topic, and usually I take at least 1 hour, 1 hour and a half just to talk about this, but just to try to be concise enough. Nowadays we have different ways to measure the training load, both internal and external. The other thing we need to measure are the training effects. This is what allow us to understand if the training is giving the effects that we expect. Measuring the effects means also that we can try to measure some subjective responses. But here we have a problem, actually, because when I moved back in sports science, another common measure was were the so-called wellness items. And you know, Mario, we worked together for 10 years, and I was working on Clinimetrics, so I was working on questionnaires. And the first thing I did, because I have no idea about the validity, I saw these items used a lot, but I had a quick look and I couldn't find actually the validation studies. And so with our PhD student, Annie, we ran a systematic reviews using the COSMIN guidelines for the risk of bias and the quality of the studies. And I was quite surprised because we found basically no studies validating these famous wellness items that, again, are recommended by some organization, are included in softwares. And so they are not validated. Some are not valid because you know that you cannot measure multidimensional constants with one item. And some studies that people interpret as validation studies in reality were just associations calculated between measures they had. And so that's a problem because we don't really have these single items that can be used, for example, day by day. There are some instruments that are more valid, like the SRSS or the ARS developed by Kelman. They are multiple items, so their implementation in practice is very low. It's used in research, but not a lot in practice, because, you know, asking players or athletes to fill long questionnaire every day or too often is not easy. And recently we have just submitted, actually in these days, a paper trying to validate two items, one on recovery and one on fatigue. The reason why we focus on these two is because fatigue is enough unidimensional to be grasped by one item, and recovery maybe. And recovery is also related to fatigue, and so it may be a sort of control item. And we use a bipolar and a unipolar scale. And at the moment we have validated in dancers, because Annie made the PhD in dancing, and we are starting the one in team sports. And in dancer, with about 200 dancers, the constant validity was confirmed and the reliability was acceptable. It has been just submitted, so has been not published. So you can measure the subjective response, but at the moment we don't have a lot of instruments. Yeah. Again.
Yeah. Just what you were thinking. I've just probably you saw. I think it was this week on a paper in this direction came out in Scandinavian about the prompts in sports science, how that there are just very few validated, and so basically what you were saying basically, yes.
Yeah, that's a problem, because the problem is that as a sports scientist we don't have the background knowledge to understand how properly validate. And indeed, in our reviews, in our review, let's say more traditional psychometric instruments are much stronger, and these are the instruments that people should use. The problem of the psychometric instruments is that they are quite long, so maybe you can use once a week. It's once a week maybe, but it's difficult a couple of times a month. But most practitioners want something to measure almost every day. Yeah. We have some projects in this direction, to be honest, also quite big. The main problem at the moment is to find the money, but as soon as we find the money, we move in that direction. Basically, I'm just applying the clinimetric methods in sport, and it's nothing new.
Yes. For guys like you, no. But based now on all your experiences and the horizons you see, for sure, can you imagine maybe it will be possible to have kind of a simple set of subjective assessment that could be used in the future? Or do you think it by the end it's again almost too simplistic?
I mean, if we get the money, maybe yes, but that's the idea, to create a core set of items. As I said, something that we did, for example, in the clinic with the COMI, the COMI questionnaire, something like that. I think, of course, it's complex, but it's like a medical setting, basically. The patients, when I was there, what to do with the patient, how to treat the patient is complicated. And you use different information. You use diagnostic, you use questionnaire, you use clinical evaluation, you use a lot of things. You start with the treatment, and after you see, once you implement the treatment, how the patient is responding, and you decide if to go on or to change. So at the end of the day, it's exactly the same in, let's say, in sport, rehabilitation, orthopedics, and all the other areas. And we need more information. These are informed decisions. So we need information in order to make a decision. And the decision is always a bit arbitrary. Even in a let's say in an easier situation, you can have a patient, but one surgeon can decide to operate, another one may think is not worth to operate. So it's a different decision, despite we have a lot of information. And even when you decide that you can operate, you have to decide what's the best technique, for example, how to operate. So and these are the same problems that we have in the future. Probably, I hope we will have more, not more information, stronger information, because now we have a lot of information. Just to give you an example, in some data set of GPS data, there are from 100 to 250 different numbers, let's say columns, including the same metric in different zones and these kind of things. How can you use all these measures? It's complicated, and even reducing the variables, like using PCA or whatever, generate components that are difficult to interpret. So I don't think that what we are doing now basically we are just multiplicating matrix. We are generating new numbers matrix every day, every week. Every company proposes something. We need instead to select the best ones. This is, in my opinion, where I'm quite sure that we will go in this direction. I see in sports science or medicine what I have seen in clinical setting. At the beginning, tons of questionnaires of instruments, 120 items, and at the end, after 20 years, they start to cut here and there, and now we have instruments like the PROMIS, which is, let's say, a state-of-the-art questionnaire, very few items. You target precise constructs, and you have this information. So I think in the future we will arrive there, maybe with 10 or 20 years of delay, but I think we will arrive there.
Yeah. Yes, hopefully. And maybe I have here one question from our friend Alan McCall. So, and I will read it exactly as he's writing, even if we maybe touch some aspects before. So, what would you recommend as the best bang for buck to improve performance of our players, whether training strategies, monitoring the strategies, etc.?
I mean, I would be billionaire if I would know the answer. No, I mean, Alan knows perfectly what I think. I think that the process and start from the coach. So I think that the teams should trust the coach. And what the supporting team staff should do is to allow the coach to do what he or she wants to do. That's our job. When I collaborate with the teams, I usually speak with the coach. I ask what you would like to do. How would you like to train these guys? And based on the answer, I try to provide the information that allow him or her to do what they have in their mind. So I think the future is to invest in good coaches, and once you have one, to trust, because having a coach and asking to change or questioning everything, in my opinion, just create confusion. Other than that, honestly, I don't know. I think that we should simplify, not because for a reductionistic approach, but we need to cut the crap. I mean, we have plenty of things that we don't know even how to interpret. There are studies saying that we need to address the collinearity. Yeah, but the best way to address the collinearity of the variables is to avoid to create collinearity unless it's really necessary. So to be more effective, we should be more selective. Instead of using 11 items not validated, maybe you can use 2 or 3 validated, so you have more stronger information, you know better how to interpret. You can develop also better studies, because now we have plenty of explorative studies. Explorative studies is fine. Once they can help in defining an hypothesis that you can test even with observation and more precisely. But now it's like in training law that we have 150 explorative studies. For maybe it's time to move on from exploration. And also the excuse, it's too complicated to see something. No, that's just an excuse. It's too complicated. But if the goal is to develop predictive model or whatever, let's do it, but do it the proper way with the proper methods. Instead of generating studies with one team, maybe we have to collaborate to create a network and running studies with the right numbers. The other problem we have is about the accuracy of the data. As I said, I try to be honest. It's more than 1 year and trying to find a good data set for running some studies. And even data set that have been published, I would never use. Because when you speak with the after 20 years, I know a lot of people working in several teams. Maybe I just call someone and I ask, how did you upload the data? It was good or bad? I said, it was crap. Don't trust those data. What do? Do I use the data for running a study? And that's probably my main limitation at the moment. I'm too concerned about the quality of the data, about misclassification, measurement error, and so I don't think it's worth to invest months in analyzing and developing studies when I don't believe about the data. Yeah.
Yes, Franco. I think we could continue.
Yeah.
But we will reserve this for a next time. So I and we thank you for your time. So
thank you.
This will be posted on our YouTube channel. I think you agree on this.
Yeah.
So, maybe you will receive other questions in the future.
Yeah, if I can, I will answer.
Yes, and of course, congratulations for all the work you are doing, and
thank you.
Looking for the excellence in these difficult areas, and but it's always a pleasure to connect with you. And
thank you very much.
And we hope that that many will at least listen to some background. Huh?
Yeah, I hope so. Anyway, thank you very much again. And as I said, I'm happy because this area start there in Zurich, in Switzerland, in Bern, and it wasn't expected actually, because I had other plans in reality. So I had to change the plan after that conference. So yeah, maybe we will see in the future anyway. But no, I couldn't imagine the impact and also the bias behind. In reality, I was thinking after the conference that was almost finished there, but after there were some movement behind, and so okay, I said let's do it. But I just hope that people understand that's a scientific issue, a scientific debate, and this is how science, in my opinion, should work. It's like the red team proposed by Daniel Lakens. Sometimes you need someone criticizing, because if you defend what you have done and you can provide other evidence. If you can't, just you can change. Yep.
Yes. So as you said in one slide, science is self-correcting, but yeah, you need some great scientists also then to work on. Huh?
Thank you very much, Mario.
Thanks a lot. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.